When they suddenly stop fighting back and their eyes go completely blank, it isn't peace, it's terror. They realize your emotional currency is no longer for sale. Today, we decode the exact psychological tipping point where an emotional manipulator's dominance dissolves and why your unshakable calm becomes their worst nightmare. We've all been conditioned to believe that conflict ends with a winner and a loser. But in the architecture of high conflict dynamics, true power doesn't roar, it anchors. Dr. Ramani often highlights how narcissistic systems depend on your hyper-arousal to maintain their equilibrium. When you stop matching their chaos with your own, a fascinating shift occurs in the limbic brain. They aren't reflecting on your feelings, they are calculating their loss of control. Drop a comment below. Have you ever noticed how silence completely dismantles an argument? Let's unpack the mechanics of that shift right now. When an emotionally exploitative individual shifts from overt hostility to erratic submissiveness, it is rarely a genuine sign of personal growth, moral awakening, or remorse. Instead, it is a visceral, survival-driven response rooted in self-preservation. To truly understand this phenomenon, we must look past the superficial performance of compliance and examine the underlying mechanics of power, control, and psychological leverage. In high conflict dynamics, a manipulator operates like a parasitic system that requires a continuous influx of emotional fuel to sustain its fragile, grandiose self-image. For months or even years, they have relied on a predictable loop. They provoke, you react. They escalate, you defend. This loop provides them with absolute psychological orientation because your emotional turbulence confirms their sense of dominance and control over the environment. However, when you fundamentally alter your internal chemistry, moving from reactive defensiveness to radical, unshakable neutrality, that entire framework collapses. The leverage they once held over your emotional state vanishes into thin air, leaving them completely unanchored. When they realize their old tactics of intimidation, guilt-tripping, and provocation no longer yield the desired emotional payoff, a profound internal panic sets in. Their sudden shift toward submissiveness or uncharacteristic politeness is not born out of newfound empathy or a desire to repair the relationship. It is a calculated retreat born out of sheer terror. They are scanning the horizon for any handle they can grab onto, any old emotional button they can press to regain their footing, but they find only a blank wall of emotional autonomy. This terrifying realization that you are no longer playing your assigned role in their script forces them into a state of severe psychological disorientation. They become submissive not because they respect your boundaries, but because they are desperately trying to appease a force they can no longer control or predict. By refusing to participate in the chaos, you strip away their primary source of psychological validation and expose the hollow fragility beneath their aggressive exterior, triggering a deep internal scramble for safety in a world where their manipulation has officially lost its power. True emotional intelligence in high conflict scenarios involves self-awareness, emotional regulation, and deep empathy calibration, allowing you to recognize reactive panic without absorbing it. When dealing with an emotionally volatile or manipulative individual, the human nervous system is naturally wired to mirror distress, matching escalation with escalation or defensiveness with panic. Emotional intelligence acts as an internal circuit breaker, interrupting this automatic contagion. It requires the capacity to observe your own internal state in real time, noticing when your heart rate spikes, when frustration bubbles up, or when the urge to defend your character takes over. Instead of letting these automatic impulses dictate your actions, you consciously pause, creating a vital space between the external stimulus and your internal response. This pause is where true self-regulation lives. It enables you to look past the smoke and mirrors of the manipulator's performance, recognizing their aggressive outbursts or sudden submissiveness not as a personal attack on your worth, but as an outward projection of their own internal chaos and desperation. Crucially, emotional calibration means you can perceive their psychological terror and erratic shifting without internalizing it or taking responsibility for managing their emotional weather. You stop feeling the compulsive need to rescue them from their own discomfort or soothe their fragile ego. By anchoring yourself in this deep, calibrated awareness, you remain a steady, immovable point of reference in the room. You become immune to the emotional contagion they are desperately trying to inflict upon you, rendering their tactical attempts at destabilization completely ineffective while preserving your own mental clarity, peace, and psychological sovereignty. Narcissistic behavior relies entirely on predictable emotional reactions, such as anger, distress, guilt, or frantic pleading, because these responses serve as the primary fuel source for their ego. In the ecosystem of emotional manipulation, an exploitative individual does not care whether the attention they receive is positive or negative. They care only that it is powerful enough to validate their existence and maintain their sense of control. Every provocation, every unfair accusation, and every fabricated crisis is specifically designed to bait you into a reactive state. When you take the bait, raise your voice, or launch into a lengthy defense of your character, you are essentially plugging them directly into your internal power grid. You are feeding the very dynamic that allows them to sustain their dominance over you. However, when you systematically starve this process of its fuel by refusing to give them the emotional reaction they are fishing for, the entire machinery of their manipulation grinds to a halt. This starvation process requires an immense amount of deliberate, conscious discipline. It means looking directly at an attempt to provoke you and choosing absolute, unshakable apathy or radical neutrality instead. When your responses become flat, predictable, and devoid of emotional charge, the manipulator is suddenly forced to operate in a vacuum. They throw tantrums, shift goalposts, or manufacture bigger emergencies. But because none of these tactics produce the explosive emotional payday they are accustomed to, their system begins to starve. Deprived of the drama that validates their internal narrative, they experience a profound loss of orientation. By refusing to supply the emotional currency they demand, you effectively cut off their oxygen supply, forcing their manipulative tactics to wither away from sheer lack of sustenance, while you preserve your own inner peace and psychological energy. Behaviors like sudden compliance, uncharacteristic vulnerability, or abrupt silence are tactical maneuvers designed to reset the dynamic and regain control of the narrative when an emotional manipulator realizes their usual aggressive strategies are failing. When overt intimidation, rage, or guilt-tripping stops working because you have built an unshakable internal boundary, the manipulator will often pivot with startling speed. They do not change because they have experienced genuine remorse or insight. Rather, they pivot because they are strategic chameleons, searching for a new tool that will bypass your defenses. Sudden compliance, where they instantly agree with everything you say or act completely agreeable, is designed to disarm you, lowering your guard by making you feel like you have finally won or gotten through to them. Once your guard is down and the protective walls you built are slightly lowered, they can seamlessly reestablish their influence over your decisions and emotions. Similarly, uncharacteristic vulnerability can be weaponized as a calculated performance to evoke your empathy, shifting the dynamic from accountability back to caretaking, where you are suddenly comforting them for the harm they caused you. Abrupt silence or withdrawal operates on a similar frequency, functioning as a subtle punishment wrapped in a cloak of martyrdom, forcing you to feel anxious, unsettled, or responsible for breaking the ice. Recognizing these shifts for what they truly are, calculated tactical pivots rather than authentic changes of heart, allows you to maintain your psychological equilibrium. By refusing to be baited by their simulated sweetness, manufactured fragility, or calculated coldness, you keep your armor intact, ensuring that their attempts to reset the chessboard and regain the upper hand are completely neutralized before they can take root in your life. If mastering your emotional baseline and dismantling manipulation patterns matters to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We break down these psychological shifts every single week. Firm, emotionless boundary enforcement acts as a psychological mirror, forcing the individual to confront their internal chaos rather than projecting it outward onto you. When dealing with someone who relies on boundary violations to maintain control, setting a clear limit is only half the battle. The real test lies in how you hold that line. An emotional manipulator is accustomed to their targets absorbing their toxic projections, taking on the burden of their bad behavior, and internalizing guilt that was never rightfully theirs. When you establish a firm, unyielding boundary without raising your voice, displaying anger, or offering lengthy justifications, you create an impenetrable wall of calm accountability. Because you refuse to take ownership of their displaced emotions, the boundary acts as a reflective surface. Instead of successfully dumping their stress, panic, or dysfunction onto you, their toxic behavior bounces right back to its original source. They are suddenly forced to look at the very chaos they tried to escape, confronting the shattered pieces of their own unstable narrative. This reflection is deeply uncomfortable for them, because they lack the emotional maturity to process self-reflection, which is precisely why they often lash out or collapse into panic when they hit your wall. By holding your ground with quiet, emotionless resolve, you protect your own mental real estate and strip them of their primary defense mechanism, turning their own dysfunction inward where it belongs and permanently altering the power dynamic of the relationship. Engaging with their defensive outbursts only fuels the cycle, because every argument, counter-explanation, or plea for fairness is treated by the manipulator as raw material to twist, weaponize, and prolong. When someone resorts to explosive anger, gaslighting, or frantic goalpost shifting, they are essentially throwing a smokescreen designed to pull you into the mud with them. They want you to match their frantic energy, defend your character, and exhaust your mental reserves in a futile debate where the rules of logic do not apply. The moment you take the bait and start arguing back, you validate the premise of their chaos, giving them the exact platform they need to keep the conflict spinning indefinitely. Radical detachment completely short-circuits this destructive loop by stripping away the friction they rely on to maintain momentum. When you refuse to engage with their manufactured crises, defend yourself against baseless accusations, or explain your valid decisions to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you deny them the sparring partner they desperately crave. It feels unnatural at first, because human instinct pushes us to correct falsehoods and restore harmony. But engaging with a closed-loop defense system only keeps you trapped in their orbit. By stepping entirely outside of the ring, letting their aggressive words hang in the air without a response, and maintaining an unbothered internal baseline, you strip away the illusion of their dominance. The conflict loses its oxygen, the performance collapses under its own weight, and the manipulator is left shouting into an empty room, unable to sustain a fight where the other person has quietly and permanently put down their weapons. Shifting your focus entirely from their erratic actions to your own internal baseline neutralizes their ability to manipulate your emotional state, because it fundamentally alters where you direct your precious mental energy. An emotionally exploitative individual thrives when your attention is externally locked onto them, constantly scanning their moods, anticipating their next outburst, or trying to manage their chaotic environment. This external focus keeps you trapped in a perpetual state of hypervigilance, handing over the remote control of your nervous system to someone who uses it to destabilize you. Reclaiming your internal locus of control means making the deliberate, radical choice to redirect that entire spotlight back onto yourself. Instead of asking what they are thinking, why they are acting that way, or how you can fix the tension, you turn inward and anchor your awareness entirely in your own breath, your own bodily sensations, and your own core values. You monitor your own emotional weather rather than theirs, asking yourself what you need, how you want to show up for yourself, and whether your actions align with your own peace. This shift does not happen overnight, but every time you catch yourself drifting into their orbit and gently pull your focus back home to your own center, you weaken their psychological grip. When your attention is no longer feeding their performance, their manipulations hit a brick wall of self-possession. By anchoring yourself completely in your own internal baseline, you stop looking to the storm for your safety and instead become the unshakable eye of the hurricane, rendering their chaotic attempts at control entirely powerless over your peace of mind. When your composure remains completely unbroken in the face of their most calculated attempts to destabilize, provoke, or intimidate you, their entire internal psychological framework collapses, triggering a profound and irreversible retreat. An emotional manipulator builds their entire identity and sense of power on the fragile premise that everyone around them is ultimately controllable, predictable, and susceptible to their psychological pressure. They rely on the intoxicating belief that their rage, guilt-tripping, or sudden submissiveness holds ultimate sway over your emotional weather. Therefore, when you stand before them with a completely unbroken composure, refusing to flinch, fracture, or feed their drama, you present them with an existential threat to their worldview. You become a living, breathing mirror, reflecting the utter futility of their entire existence and the hollowness of their manipulative strategies. This moment of realization is terrifying for them because it strips away their armor and forces them to confront the deep, agonizing void beneath their grandiosity. They realize, with sudden and overwhelming clarity, that their leverage has completely evaporated and that you are entirely unreachable by their tactics. This triggers an internal panic so profound that their defensive systems completely short-circuit, often leading them to withdraw, flee, or scramble for distance, because your unbreakable calm is a testament to a strength they can neither conquer nor comprehend. By maintaining your sovereign composure right up to the ultimate threshold, you don't just win the interaction, you permanently shatter the illusion of their dominance, stepping into a space of enduring personal freedom where their chaos can no longer touch your spirit. In the end, Navigating high conflict dynamics and emotional manipulation is never about winning an argument or forcing someone else to change. It is entirely about reclaiming your own psychological sovereignty. When you master your emotional baseline, starve their need for reactive fuel, and hold firm, unshakable boundaries, you stop participating in a game designed to drain your spirit. Their erratic shifts, sudden submissiveness, and manufactured chaos lose all their power the moment you refuse to match their turbulence with your own. True strength does not roar or retaliate. It simply stands immovable, turning every attempt at control into a mirror that reflects their own defeat. By choosing radical calm over reactivity, you step out of their storm permanently, leaving their manipulation behind in a quiet space where your peace can no longer be shaken.